keeping the time quite strictly so that people can move between sessions and move between different conferences that we know are operating at the same time. So I will give each speaker 20 minutes and then allow another 5 minutes for them to either finish or allow for questions. If we don't make that deadline, we'll see if there's any time left over for questions. Please use the chat function that's available to you. It has been giving problems apparently, but is now working again. So we look forward to your questions in the chat. And I'm going to introduce you first and hand over to our first speaker, Dr. Kasim Wutondai. And he's joining us from the UK, where they have a slight time difference. I hope it wasn't inconvenient for you.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
Yeah. So Professor Wutondai has a PhD in statistical data mining, which is a very highly sought after competency at the moment, one we'd all like to clone from him. His research interests are in extracting knowledge from multifaceted data, and he has successfully participated in a number of interdisciplinary research projects, which is really topical at the moment and something we're all looking to achieve. His own research focus is on the application of deep learning and other machine learning techniques in interdisciplinary modeling, particularly for sustainable development goals and in viewing each SDG as a big data node. Thanks, Professor Wutondai. Over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Adele. I'll go straight to sharing my screen now. It's just gone past 10 o'clock here, so it's not inconvenient. Right. Okay, so yeah, the topic today is practical illustrations of data-driven solutions for societal challenges, which is a joint work with a colleague of mine and a contribution from one of my students, Chandana. So just a bit of introduction to what I'm going to be talking about today. We'll take you through problem space, where we look at data-driven challenges and solutions. Then we'll be looking at two fundamental concepts in relating to the topic of today, which are data randomness and concept drift, and how these they impinge on decision support systems, and also be giving a bit insights into spatial temporal variations. We'll look at dashboards which currently in use, and we'll look at what knowledge gaps we stand to fill. And then we go to sustainable development goals. The 17, I'm sure you will have heard what these are. We'll be looking at the non-orthogonality, actually, that is, the non-orthogonality of sustainable development goals. And then we go to sustainable development goals partnerships, which is the main topic of our discussion today. And then we'll be introducing generic data framework for addressing global challenges in an interdisciplinary context. Finally, I give illustrations, practical illustrations on how I won't be doing A, but I will be doing mainly C. I won't be doing A and B because of time constraints. And finally, we draw conclusions about how we can adopt this interdisciplinarity in filling our knowledge gaps using R and Jupyter live demonstrations, again, if time allows. Right, okay, as I said, data randomness and concept drift, these are two fundamental concepts, and they are the top list of challenges researchers face in modern day data analysis. I mentioned dashboards earlier. We've seen dashboards, particularly during this time of pandemic. The Johns Hopkins University, it helps us visualize uh, and animate data. The challenges and highlights the need for complementing them, because mainly they are descriptive. They provide only descriptive statistics. So we need to fill the gaps via predictive in a predictive context. So there can be no better way of doing that than using the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And the reason we chose the SDGs is because they span across the entire spectrum of life. I mean, if you looked at the 17 of them, you can think that almost any project we do today hinges on these 17. They epitomize the entire spectrum of our existence. So we recently developed a framework which aligns with all these 17 SDGs, and this is one which we'll be introducing later on. We'll be highlighting the problem space, and that requires data-driven solutions, and we are going to use only selected societal challenges from the data partnership open-ended project. Probably you've never seen this, but I'll be taking you to the web link. It's a voluntary UN SDG partnership project. So at the end, we'll be highlighting paths for future research and what these affect our research aspirations. So data generation consumption, I don't think I need to say a lot about this. We know that our capacity to generate data far outperform our ability to process that. And that by itself is a gap. Forecasts show that this trend will continue to increase. And by 2025, we are going to have created, captured, or copied about 180 zettabytes. That is about 180 times each gigabyte on your computer device to the power 12. Yeah, so it's just to give you the feel of it, at the in the southeast part of the screen, you'll see when I was a young student, this has gone back now, I can tell how many years, 1985, I bought an Amstrad PC, I remember, which cost me 1,100 pounds. And it was top of the range at that time, at 512 kilobyte. Today, my Lenovo RAM has a RAM of 16 GB with a storage of 512 GB. Now, the zettabytes we're talking about, 180 zettabytes by 2025, that is about what I have today multiplied by 1,000, by 1,000, by 1,000, by 1,000 again. So it shows how much data we generate today. And so coping with data randomness and concept drift. First, simply defined, data randomness arises from the fact that we do make decisions based on estimates or samples of data, which create errors from of different types. So for training, we train our models based on training data, which generates a training error. We validate these models based on a validation error. We test them again on samples which are random. Now that provides randomness, which scientists, researchers always have to deal with. Concept drift, again, these variations, definitions change over time. So for instance, we just wonder how much aid packages contribute to economic development of developing countries. Has it had an effect? It all depends on how these are defined, how much do travel bans. I mean, today, a few days ago, we saw the issue about Omicron, which was sequenced and identified in South Africa, and immediately some countries imposed travel bans. But how much do travel bans to or from specific countries do actually help in fighting Omicron? I mean, do we know the original Omicron and how has it traveled? All these issues fall within concept drift. Right. Okay. So these are three of the most popular dashboards that we have to date. One, the World Bank Sustainable Development Goals Atlas, our welding data, the Millennium Institute. I think I needed to add here the Johns Hopkins University dashboard. You all have seen this. I don't think I'll be going into these websites because they take ages to load and that will eat into my time. But the most important thing I want to draw your attention to is that the advent of dashboards has prompted further thinking on how these can be enhanced by increasing transparency, accountability, engaging stakeholders and government institutions. So we shall be highlighting parts of complementing accessible descriptive data through these dashboards. And also we'll be highlighting special temporal variations via dashboards and see how they provide insights into how different societies have been impacted by the global challenges, for instance, the pandemic or climate change. So SDGs, what are these? I mean, this is common knowledge, I think. It's we know there are 17 of them. Of course, the 17th simply talks about partnerships that countries should collaborate in attaining these goals. They were set by the United Nations 2015, and with the aim to attain them by 2030. So at times these are referred to as Agenda 2030. As I said before, the SDGs are non-orthogonal in the sense that any changes in one of them will affect others. So in statistical terms, we say these are highly correlated entities, and with all these targets and indicators, hundreds and hundreds of them. So tackling these, attaining these targets require very strong and coordinated partnership among sectors, countries, institutions. So the COVID-19 pandemic is a typical example of the challenges we face. The pandemic, alongside extreme weather conditions, constantly remind us that we have knowledge gaps to fill. So partnership. Now, this is an interesting one because it's a voluntary project. It's a voluntary project. You and I can just register there, say, okay, I'm working on Sustainable Development Goals partnership. It's interesting that I haven't registered my interest yet. We haven't registered our interest yet, but we are going to do probably in the next months, few months. But these are quite interesting because what the United Nations set up this open-ended project and said, okay, if you are partnering, find projects working together on the bottom panel, you can see the number of partnership in each of the SDGs. So for instance, in SDG 1, the current number is 854. This will have changed by the time, since we wrote this a few days ago. And so the highest number is in SDG number 14. And you see that we have very low numbers in 559 in SDG 9, which is on innovation. So basically, these are researchers who do work in different aspects of SDG. So this is the framework that we developed in one of most recent publication. You can see this in the reference. So it talks about, it's a Venn diagram which talks about interdisciplinarity, that combining domain knowledge and tools, skills across sectors, across regions, across legislations. Now, go back there. Now, the partnership, the partnership project, there are about 32 different partnerships. And so I'm going to try to go to that data set, which is about 12,000 observations. Hope it won't take too long to load. Oh, goodness. So it involves, these are presumably different projects. The good thing is that they're very detailed. They tell you who is working and where they're based, and they give you a descriptive narrative of what they are doing. What they probably don't say is actually from their websites is what they've actually been they're finding. So these are the, on the left hand side, these are the targets. Sorry, so the SDGs, and as I said, these are 12,000 observations. I'm going to have to stop that, just I'm aware of the time, but
You have 5 minutes to go.
Oh, okay. So the first image I'm sharing with you, it shows the level of partnership, different partners, different locations in each of the SDGs. So these are very similar. This is in terms of duration, and the other one was in terms of coverage, and also, sorry, this is this is in terms of duration. It's a correspondence analysis which maps the each SDGs and the number of years which the partnership has been going on for. Again, this in terms of percentage shows you the partnerships around the world and the mapping versus the SDGs. A percentage of those, I have to rush to the most important thing, and that is the recommender system we're developing to look into the information from these partnerships using NLP. Now, we can view the frequency of the words which appear, and we're going to have to use these to guide us into what actually is being done by each of these and what are the outcomes of all this. This is a rotated image. It looks quite weird. It's supposed to be rotated minus 90 degrees to the left because of, okay. So we can look into each of the variables in the data set that I showed to see the frequency of for instance, this one is about the beneficiary, the countries which benefited. And the most interesting things here that for the first 10 countries, there's no African countries appears. You'll have to go up to 30 countries to see Kenya and Nigeria appearing in there. Okay, here are some basic considerations of how to address the data challenges via the generic modeling, the generic data-driven framework I shared with you ago. And these are different scenarios. I had live demos of this one, but I don't think I'm going to have enough time to run you through that. So finally,
1 minute.
1 minute. That's perfect. Okay, so in conclusion, maintaining effective partnerships is crucial in addressing global challenges, as we've been shown by the COVID-19 pandemic. As I said, there's no better way than looking at a bigger picture with SDGs, the constant mutation of the virus, and especially what we saw recently in the last few days, it shows the need for having a unified understanding of what global challenges are. It's for instance, banning travel from or to South Africa and Botswana. Does it exhibit partnership in tackling the pandemic? So these are the issues which, of course, it's fairly obvious that it does not. So we're looking to register our interest to the SDG partnership of this voluntary project in the next few months, as I said before, and our focus will be on the triggers of the targets, and most importantly, opening up the non-orthogonal SDG fabric to an interdisciplinary and coordinated data-driven solution. So that is from me, and thank you very much indeed for your attention. Most welcome if you have any questions.
Thank you, Professor. I'm not sure if we have any questions yet. We'll follow up. We'll keep an eye on the chat if any questions come through for you. But thank you very much for that very interesting insight. I mean, I think we've all seen the value of dashboards during the pandemic and the value that they bring, especially to the SDGs, in making scientific findings available to the community in a manner that's really understandable. So thank you very much for that. We do need to move on promptly. The next speaker is Mr. Isak van der Walt from the University of Pretoria. Isak is currently the Digital Scholarship and Innovation Manager for the Department of Library Services at the University of Pretoria. His responsibilities include digital scholarship, information technology, digitization, and the library makerspace. And I think most of us are aware of his innovative planning and execution of the makerspace. He's also done some very interesting work in the implementation of the first robot librarian called Libby, and he is also involved at the moment as the technical lead for the South African Sustainable Development Hub, which is steering their artificial intelligence project to enhance research discovery. Thank you, Isak. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Dale. Just going to make sure if my screen is visible.
We see it, yeah.
Perfect, thank you so much. And thank you for the time and the invite as well to do this talk. It is a talk that I'm passionate about. Previously, I could not do it in person. But what I'm going to do is to just give you an overview of research data services and sort of the maturity capability models that are attached to them. So we kind of need to sort of just look into the context and where we're going. And then I'll give you a bit of background on some of the models, just a brief overview on research data services, why we need to do this, what models are available, and who should do this, and then just some last recommendations and notes. So I'm going to start off with this quote from Maya Angelou, who is a famous poet and American civil rights activist. And she says, you can't really know where you're going until you know where you have been. And this is very true when it comes to strategies and the implementation of things as well. So with a strategy, you kind of have to know where you are before you can actually move on to sort of where you are going. So I'm not going to give a strategic talk just now, but what I'd like to do is just to highlight to you these core elements of the strategy to just set the context for this as well. One of the first elements is obviously the arenas as to where we are playing, in what environments are we playing. So we're playing in the education sector, the academic space, research data, and whatever the case might be. So these models will be applicable to various scenarios, but for now we're going to focus on universities and academic environments. So what are the differentiators? What differentiates us from another institution with regards to our services or products that we deliver, what are the vehicles, so how we're going to move forward and how we are going to achieve our goals. And the staging and the pace would be the speed at which we move. So are we going to do a few quick strategies, quick win strategies to obtain a larger strategy? And what will the ultimate payoff be of that strategy? So what would the payoff be of a data repository? What would the payoff be of something as simple as a data management plan or software that relates to it? Right. So as I mentioned, this is not a strategic talk. So I want to give you background on the capability maturity model that I'm working with, for that's quite familiar in the domain. In 1986, this was developed by the American Defense Force, and they used this model to measure the formality of products and services by contractors. So they were paying large sums of money for contractors on research and different things, but they had to measure where they are with the products and services that were being developed, right? So in that model, there are 5 levels of maturation. So it's the initial, repeatable, defined, capable, and efficient levels of maturation. And I'm going to show you the model in just a bit. So the initial would obviously be where you just started with a initiative on a server, on a service, where it is repeatable, where it becomes something that you have to kind of do every day or every month or every year. And then it's well defined. So there's policies and procedure documents around the process. And then you have capable, which obviously allows you then to deliver this as a normal service. And then efficient is when it starts to become quantifiable and can measure the success of a specific product or service. Now, within the model as well, you have 5 elements. So first of all is the level of maturity, which I just showed you just now. Then you have your key performance areas, which you will see once I show the model. These are the specific areas. So as an example, your infrastructure implementation or your metadata services. Then your goals and your objectives of what you would like to achieve, and then your common features among them, and then the key activities relating to that, right? But each level of maturity has multiple performance areas, right? And it will make more sense when I show it just now. And then each performance area has a multiple number of processes, and each process has generic and specific goals and activities. So before I show you the model, we just need to be aware that there are 2 types of measurements that you can do. So stage is where you measure the overall model maturity. So then I look at the whole of research data services for an institution as an example. Continuous is where you measure a specific key performance area. So this would be your metadata services or your infrastructure support or your long-term preservation. So the stage 1 again is when you look at your overall full model, and then continuous is where you look at a specific performance area. So when you look at continuous, there are 5 or there's 4 levels that you're looking at, and this is for continuous improvement. So you look at incomplete. So let's take a data management plan or platform as an example. Incomplete is where you haven't started anything, you're barely in the sort of planning phases. And performed is where, if you look at it from a technical perspective, the platform has been set up and people can log on and they can create a management plan for themselves, a data management plan for themselves. Managed is where this is something that is managed by a specific department. They are looking over all the administration elements of the system and so forth. And then the 3rd level is where this is defined in the institution. It has sort of become norm. When we look at the stage improvement, that is the overall maturity model. Again, you have your initial stage, your managed, defined, quantitatively managed, and then lastly, you're just optimizing the services. Right, so when we look at the model, this is now an example of that said model. So you have your levels right here, right? from your lowest level up to your highest level in terms of maturity. So if you remember, this is where it's quantifiably, you can measure it. This is where you're optimizing. And this is obviously level 1 where you're just starting out. Now here you have your key performance areas. Now I'm not going to go through all of them, and it's not necessary for you to be able to read them right now. So I will just read on your behalf. I'll go with IT infrastructure. It's something that I'm quite familiar with. So when I look at the maturity of IT infrastructure, level 1 means IT infrastructure provisioning is patchy, disorganized, and poorly publicized. Now, what this means is, if I think back to where we started with research data management at the University of Pretoria, data for researchers were stored all over the place, external hard drive, cloud services, on a flash drive or just on a local computer. And there's no organization of that data. So there is no available data on the institutional level for researchers to work on. When we move to level 2, which is higher up, you can see that funds are invested in technology and skills, responsibilities are defined, and processes are established, defined, and documented. This means that there has been, as an example, storage space has been purchased for the institution, or a storage service provider has been appointed. The necessary skills are in place. Who is responsible for storing data? Who is responsible for the provisioning of space and so forth has been defined, and the process has been established. So as an example, this is something that you can request via your institution's IT department or service platforms, and it's also documented. When we move up a little bit higher, this is where management shows active support into the performance area, the key performance area, where they are vested in the sort of the longevity, the importance of the process. So again, investing into a platform where all your researchers can store, it becomes policy, it becomes sort of a standard operating procedure. It's well communicated, and it's integrated. So as an example, if you take something like Figshare, it's become integrated with a lot of the institutional authentication platforms. You can sign on with it, and even other platforms for that matter. So it becomes part of the organizational ecosystem. That's where you are at level 3. Level 4 is where funding is adapted to the need. So this means, as an example, then that every year there is funding available to the specific area, and it receives annual attention, and it is budgeted for and accounted for, and then management is actively engaged in it, and then obviously documentations get up to date. And then level 5 is where you're optimizing. So there's a concerted effort to maintain and update and publicize infrastructure, and metrics and feedback are used to optimize services. So this is where you get your reports on system, how it's being used. Are people complying with what needs to happen within that environment? So these different key performance areas will differ from institution to institution, but the layout and the model stays the same. So, but we'll get to what I recommend for us, to sort of look into the future. So this is just a brief overview, and I'm not going to go through all of them. You might be familiar with them. So this is just a list of the research data services that are available. So there might be 1 or 2 missing, or some that you've never seen before. But these are things like data and researcher IDs, data citation services, data curation, data referencing, metadata services, DMP assistance, and mandate support. So you can see that a model can be quite complex when it comes to measuring all of this. Now, the big problem is, and sort of if you listen to the previous presentation, if you look at the rate and the pace at which things are developing, I think oftentimes we lose focus when we try and implement new services within the organization without ensuring that existing services are mature enough to the point where you can measure them and optimize them. So things are moving so quickly that you hear this new service or this new feature that you would need to implement within your department or in your institution, but you might be lacking, internally. So that's why we need to bring in these models, is to ensure that all these different elements are being measured, can be accounted for, are they official, are they formal, and are they optimized for the institution. Right, so that brings me to sort of why we need to do this. All right, so effective processes enable the organization to operate efficiently. Now, many times this year, you've heard people say data is the new gold, and this has never been more true, right? So what we need to be able to do is to say that government funds quite a lot of our research, if not all of our research. So we need to be able to effectively manage that resource. Now we can do this by knowing what is going on in our institutions, right, so that we can operate efficiently. So this would be the same as taking my car in for a service, and later in the afternoon I just get it back, and I hope that they've done everything that they could without investigating, can that organization actually service the car? Do they have the tools in place? Do they have the policies in place? And so forth and so forth. So we would like to ensure that organizations operate efficiently when it comes to managing their data, and to ensure that that asset is managed properly. All right, so good processes also enable efficiency and scalability. So if you look at a DMP platform as an example, if I implement a DMP plan on my own sandbox in my office, I can get that going and I can do my own data management plans. But that is nowhere near the space where it should be and how it should be operated. So when it comes to that, it should be scalable to level 5, where this is an enterprise system where it is being managed by the institutions with all the roles and responsibilities clarified and also documented. All right, so greater maturity could also result in resource and cost reduction. So what I mean by this is, if you look at research data management at the University of Pretoria, the amount of human capital that was invested when we started with our RDM endeavors, there were quite a lot of people involved in the process. Now, this is not essentially just capital, but you're looking at human capital invested into getting a specific element going. So if you can get these processes streamlined and you can mature them in a scalable and fast manner, you can reduce costs in the sense of either physical capital or human capital by reducing the number of people that are involved in the process, and then can actually be used in other processes as well. All right, so greater efficiency and more accurate processes, and then a reduced risk in the overall research data related services. What I mean by this is, as mentioned earlier, data is an asset and we need to manage it efficiently. All right. So this model also then indirectly supports and classifies roles and responsibilities. By having that model, it actually serves as a matrix as to who is responsible for what area when it comes to your overall data services or your research data services. It provides a snapshot of your current state to ensure that you are aligned, or you need to realign with your institutional strategies, and can identify areas of concern. So you will, on that model, very quickly see that the majority of your research data services are advancing beyond level 3, and one of them is stuck in number 1. And then you can start asking the questions as to why, and what are the resources required, and why is it stalling out. And then it kind of creates a draft roadmap for intensifying your resources and where to require it. So when you look at what is available, so the one I showed you was the bare basic generic capability maturity model, but you have some that have been developed by the data management maturity model that's been developed by the Enterprise Data Management Council. You have the Data Management Book of Knowledge that's been developed by the Data Management Association, the IBM Data Governance Council maturity model, And the one that I actually just showed you was the one by the Australian National Data Services, and it's their capability maturity model. And then if you do some research, you'll find some other available ones as well. Right, so who should do this? And I think this is open for debate, but I think it should be a national effort, a coordinated effort on a national level by bodies like Dirisa to give guidance as to what is available, what should be available, what should be in place, and how to measure it. And this should happen, be done by all South African universities and research councils. And then when you move down to that, it needs to filter down into the institutional level. So as an example, the University of Pretoria should be able to measure its own research data services in terms of its maturity as an institution and similar to other institutions as well. And as I mentioned earlier, some of the KPIs might differ, but they need to align over to the national level as well. And then you can drill it down to departmental level, where you have your maturity model for the Department of Library Services, an example. And there again, the KPIs will differ to that of the overall national level one, but it needs to align still. And there you will have individuals and units who are responsible for certain elements. So you can see there actually that it also needs to just roll up onto the national level. All right, so just some last recommendations and notes is that I think we should look into the development of a national maturity model for research data services in South Africa. And we need some advocacy through various stakeholders, again, such as Dirisa and perhaps some communities of practice, which we'll hear about a bit later. Then I think also we need to develop a sort of alignment of institutional capability maturity models. So from the University of Pretoria side, I have engaged some of the colleagues already to start developing this and to sort of get it in place. And then the development of a departmental capability maturity model to see where we are at. Then we would need to annually review this. So I think on a national level, to perhaps review on an annual basis, I think it would be quite a big task to measure this amongst all the institutions, universities and research councils. But I think this would need to happen on an annual basis due to all of the work and information that you would need to come through. And I also think on an institutional level, that should perhaps be on an annual basis, that it needs to be measured. But when it comes to a departmental level, I think it is less people involved, less resources involved, and that can be measured perhaps per semester basis, as I'm sure it will also assist the department in terms of things that they need to do. And then just the last note is that a review ensures a continuation and maturation of the services. So if you do this and if it is documented, I think that
you have
people
5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, I appreciate it. And I think that that serves as a really nice heat map as to kind of show where you're at and where you need to work on. And then last note, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, a substantial difference in the models and key performance areas indicates a lack of consensus of the overall RDS objectives. And what I mean by that is, I'm sure a few of us are quite aware of all the stakeholders involved when it comes to coordinating research data services at institutions. So if you just top of my head think about Department of Library Services, Information Technology Services, research offices, these stakeholders need to communicate and are jointly responsible for the services. So you need to look into, when you review these models, to see, is there consensus amongst what needs to be delivered and how it's being coordinated. Yeah, so I think we need to definitely look into how we can spark this and take the discussion further. Thank you for your time, Chair. That's my session.
Thank you, Isak. That was very interesting. I think we were all eyeing that matrix with interest to see how our own services would be measured. but honestly, the print was too small. So I'm hoping we will see the slides so that they will be shared with us and we can track it later. I'm keeping an eye on the chat. In the meantime, one thought, Isak, what do you think of, I can see this is a really internal exercise, a very strong internal exercise. It might be something that would lead towards a core trust seal certification. And I know our next speaker, Nicholas, has been through that process. I'm not sure what the overlap is between the two. It might be very interesting to see how they actually align.
Yeah, I think it might be beneficial for institutions to get some type of certification or at least recognition of the maturity of their services, because I think it would be beneficial for institution to say, when it comes to the government or whichever investor investing into institution, you can at least say that we do comply with all these things and we do guarantee a specific level of the research data services. So I think it's definitely something that would be worth investigating. I'd like to hear Nicholas's thoughts on that as well, perhaps, if there's time.
We have a question I think we should respond to in the meantime. Kassim is actually asking, given that you need an annual review, which is understandable, are the stages you mentioned, for example, implementation and managed, etc., are they redefined annually as well?
They will change over time because the services, unfortunately, aren't set in stone. If you think about just something as simple as storage at an institution, you know, a lot of institutions might go for internal storage, hosting their own storage on site, and then also other institutions that look into cloud hosting for some of their storage with the infrastructure, and that will obviously define new metrics and new key performance areas that need to be in place. So, but the higher up you go in terms of the evaluation, so if you look on a national level, there it will become a little bit more generic. But when you start moving lower down into the institution, so on a national level, you'd look into IT infrastructure and storage, you know, and that's as generic as it can get. But when it filters down to the institution and then departmental level, it will go into a little bit more detail, but it still needs to align with IT infrastructure and storage as an example on the national level. Yeah.
Very interesting. Very interesting. A whole new area of quality control. So that's really great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Let's move on then to our last speaker for this session is Mr. Niklas Zimmer from the University of Cape Town. Nicholas has always had a very rich and diverse freelance career, including lecturing in theory and the discourse of art and critical studies, giving workshops in video, sound, and photography. So it was no surprise when he was employed at UCT as the director, as the manager of digital library services, which at the time comprised digitization. And it was no surprise when that developed very quickly to include research data management, digital scholarship, GIS support for the spatial data needs of researchers, and of course, digital curation, which I think Nicholas will be speaking to us about today. Nicholas, over to you.
Thank you so much, Dale. I will try and share, but it's changed now, excuse me. It's going to take me a second. I will share my browser and I hope it'll work as well for you and it will for me. Is this now, okay, is this now working?
We see it,
okay.
Fine.
Okay,
Thanks.
Great. Thanks so much for the introduction, and wow, thank you for the two previous speakers. I was a bit out of my depth listening to Prof. Kassim, but it was very, very impressive, and I look forward to reading a little bit more on that topic. It's obviously a lot to put into a short space of time, and Isak, there's lots of resonances there, and I really, really look forward to hopefully working together on that very important subject of so getting basically some sort of line into this very fast-moving environment where we are finding ourselves often under a lot of pressure to perform many different roles all at the same time. So I think that's a good segue into my topic. I'm talking about the community of data stewards and champions at UCT, as convened by the department that I'm managing, Digital Library Services at UCT Libraries. Quick index, what is this community? What is this department that's currently convening it? And then a few very practical activities and touch points between the community and the department. And then a brief summary what this is all about. And I think that's where it will close out to what Isak was touching on as well. So first of all, who, what, where, why, when. The inspiration was very much firmly seeded at SciDataCon in 2018. I think many of us in this call were there. International Data Week in Gaborone. It was full of inspiration, and particularly the talks by Marta and Rosie and James Savage, particularly James, I think were really inspiring to say, well, I think this is the thing that we need. This is the thing that's actually there to solve a lot of our problems that we've been experiencing, trying to sort of embed and make research data services in general more successful at the institution. So in the context of that, I joined the interest group, Professionalizing Data Stewardship of the RDA. Currently, there's actually a wonderful survey out there. I just want to punt that it's available via the RDA page. I can also pop it into the chat later on. But we are basically looking at how to actually professionalize the role of data stewardship across various institutional models. So first of all, you can find out about the data stewards on the website, on the Digital Library Services website. But the way we envisage the community from the get-go is that they provide domain-specific knowledge to assist the libraries and their colleagues with the processes of curating research data from various fields, because obviously research data are immensely heterogeneous, and the libraries simply don't have neither the capacity nor necessarily at all the core to be subject experts. But at the same time, we do manage the data repository, etc. So there's obviously need for human capacity there. So the community sees itself as being part of driving innovation at UCT in the areas of open science, of digital scholarship, digital curation, and RDM. So we have been working with this inspiration from elsewhere, of this idea of a scholarly commons for many years, even prior to the data stewards community, and this kind of fitted together very well. So basic idea is that we have this very heterogeneous community of stakeholders at a university, especially a research-intensive university, that also does teaching and all sorts of other things. And then we have this shared pool of practices and guiding principles. So for instance, an open access policy. And then we have shared resources, or resources that should be shared, but are often maybe not commonly utilized, or only utilized by certain parts of that stakeholder community, such as, for instance, the generic data repository. So the stakeholders might be seen as the faculties, but then also the support services, and the faculties are often seen in sort of in division as the humanities, arts, and social sciences on the one hand, and as the STEM on the other. Then in terms of the resources, we can easily think of several hundreds or thousands of them, but I've just put here a few examples. For instance, the data repository, or an online community such as the Open Science Framework, or the shared digital collections platform, or a preservation system, or the DMP system, or whatever it is that every one of us needs to sort of use and wants to make use of. And then, of course, the shared practices and guiding principles, and that's often where already things tend to fall apart, because we see very divergent practices across the different stakeholders. The one simply refused to use the email client provided by the central IT services, which creates problems with calendars, and or the other uses a different cloud service provider. And then, of course, between the two, there's an enormous amount of data friction. And so between these sort of, in this balancing act that needs to happen between sufficient freedom and sufficient control, we see then a very important role being played by the data stewards, the actual people on the ground who typically are that person that knows where the data is and how it's being stored and how it's being managed. That's generally often not the PI, not necessarily the main researcher, but maybe an assistant. And there's certain risks, obviously, that are very apparent that go along with that. Often in that role, these people fulfilling that role are coming and going. They're not necessarily being given that role in an official way or in a particularly concerted effort. There's not necessarily a sort of broad training, but a very subject-specific training. So there are a lot of issues that arise out of this, but this is kind of the picture that I want to present you with, of a community that promotes, shares, and supports good data practices at an institution. And so here's, for instance, one sample scenario where the libraries provide guidance in the form of curation checklists and quick guides for the use of the data repository and a lot of advocacy, etc. The libraries also have a role in working together with the research office and other stakeholders, like e-research, etc., to make sure that the RDM policy, first of all, exists, that it's maybe updated, and that it's being observed by the various role players. And then, of course, we have the data steward in a particular group, like, for instance, in this case, the South African Tuberculosis Vaccine Initiative. And they then make use of the repository in more than just a basic user role, but also in ensuring that whatever outputs from that group altogether, from others in that group, are published on the data repository, are actually co-curated by them as subject experts together with the data curators at the libraries. So that's where really the circle starts closing. And obviously the research office also plays a big role, because there's a reporting function. It's very important. Usually there's an open access or an open data mandate that comes along with the research funding. And so, of course, the research office would want to know if the data has been successfully published as in open access via the institutionally provided data repository. So that's just one sample scenario through this thicket of resources, both in terms of materials and hardware and software, but most importantly, different people that are being networked in this community. So they represent a wide spectrum of knowledge domains and skills, and they take so what we see as the data stewards taking on more hands-on tasks. The data champions play maybe more of a showcasing role or an advocacy role. It might be your very busy deputy vice chancellor or a principal investigator, and they might have a little sticker on their laptop in a meeting, or they might just mention, because they know that there's a particular kind of process or software available in order to assist, or even just mention the community, which is very, very important in itself. So we meet informally once every month, and we share ideas, stories, news, etc. But we also have, importantly, a sort of 24/7 environment on Microsoft Teams with different channels on different aspects like preservation, like the data repository, but not so system focused, but a little bit more focused on areas of engagement. So the galleries, libraries, archives, museums, which is typically more digital humanities focused, has its own channel with various data stewards that are working on making digital collections showcased online, for instance. So the department, very, very briefly, Digital Library Services, sits within this virtual environment of UCT's eResearch Center, and provides data management and digital scholarship services to the UCT community. And some of the selected activities and touch points between the Data Stewards community and the DLS department are reviewing DMPs, creating DMP templates, performing data curation profile interviews, which is sort of like a departmental DMP type documentation, showcasing digital collections, reviewing, as I mentioned already before, submissions to the data repository, which is in our case called Ziva Hub, writing case studies, which also helps to promote the use of Figshare for institutions in different innovative ways for the different knowledge communities, because there are actually many ways to use such a system, and of course help us co-author the Ziva Hub guides, driven from below. So guidelines on how to enrich your profile and so on, and digitally preserving data. That's something that we're busy implementing, and obviously contributing suggestions through DLS to the UCT eResearch Center is also very important. So for instance, in terms of reviewing DMPs and creating DMP templates, this is roughly how we see the journey from proposal stage to the active research to the final submission of data into the open data repository. Obviously, this process is very reliant on humans actually helping one another. Even though the DMP online or DMP roadmap environment is very guidance driven, very templated, it seems to really require a lot of collaboration, and that's fine. And I think that's very much what a community like this is there for, rather than relying on one or two, or maybe in some institutions, not even a full-time position that's supposed to run the service, keeping that system up and going and updated, but also now probably being very overburdened with the task of giving subject knowledge input into each and every data management plan. That's just asking too much from the libraries. But by actually copying in a data steward, and this is roughly what the system looks like, very dry but very effective, you can now make effective use of the system's affordances by saying, well, co-contribute, actually contribute to the guidance, to the sample answers, and to the actual specific answers on any specific data management plan. So a very useful role that the data stewards have been playing in this context for 2-3 years now. Obviously, then there's also the data curation profile interview. We used to do this pre-COVID, pre-lockdown with a clipboard. And now we've ported the whole process onto the data management planning platform as a new template. And so it works very, very nicely there as well. Showcasing digital collections is possible now via our newly this year inaugurated digital collections showcasing website called Ibali. It's a system running on OMKS and IIIF. And this, of course, is completely unthinkable, again, without data stewards actually owning the data and owning the way the data is represented online. And there's been an enormous amount of innovation in that space in this year, particularly. That's where, this is a different, maybe zoomed in view of the environment that I showed you earlier of the scholarly commons. So this is looking a little bit more closely in at the libraries research, where we envisage that particularly in the humanities or digital humanities, we work as a kind of glam lab where data stewards from the humanities actually drive these different sites being spun up on the Ibali environment. So I've mentioned OMEKS as a web publishing platform where we can have any number of subsites, digital collection subsites, and the two IIIF, the manifest and media server, very, very important as a standardized method. And I think this maybe speaks a little bit to what Isak was talking about earlier, a kind of standardized internationally reusable way of making data, of delivering data, particularly obviously images, but not just images, with structured metadata. So that's been very exciting to see that go up. And so here are various websites. I can't go into them, there's not enough time, but hopefully the presentation slides will be shared. But here are a few sample sites just to also show the breadth of needs. So where, for instance, the one, retags, Reimagining Tragedy in Africa and the Global South, will have a strong focus, obviously, on theatre making, on interviews, on productions, etc. The Tomani-san Hugh Brody collection from the special collections at the libraries has a strong focus on audiovisual material placed on a map. So the GIS services, for instance, came in here very strongly. And then the isiXhosa Intellectual Traditions Under Colonialism project, for instance, worked with legacy, with old digitized newspapers, which needed to be able to be zoomed in and read in that way. So that's also where the IIIF functionality came in. So these are features that are not necessary for each and every site. So every environment really does need a person to develop the affordances of the system as appropriate for the data that they're wanting to share. So reviewing Ziva Hub submissions, another very, very important aspect of the community that I've mentioned. Everyone is familiar with the principle of findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. Again, those things are not simply there from the outset. They rely on good metadata. They are in fact all about good metadata. And again, that's actually a community effort. That's not the work of one single person. It's also not something that a system will simply do for all of us. It's something that needs to be verified. We need to have this quality assurance loop with data stewards from the various communities. This just makes further the point. I mean, even just the selection of an appropriate license should not rest with the libraries alone. That's actually already a conversation in itself.
5 minutes left.
Yes, thank you, Dale. I've mentioned the Figshare case studies. So far we've written 4, and they've been about very, very divergent issues. For instance, one researcher who actually uses the data repository as a way of to support supervision, so securely sharing data just directly between supervisor and student. Not necessarily something that immediately meets the eye when one talks about an open access repository. So it was very nice to be able to highlight these different uses for the system. And of course, the co-authoring of the quick guides, as you can see, we've got a whole range of them now. I think by now it's probably 12 to 15, somewhere there. Again, some of which highlight or surface very, very important detail about different ways of using this shared infrastructure, which again has a lot to do with practice rather than with just system. And I think this focus on practice is where we almost can't think of working without this community anymore. And then a new environment for us, digital preservation. Obviously working on this for many years now, but in terms of the wonderful model that Isak shared earlier, we're still finding ourselves even a few years in the early stages. It's a very, very long process to embed digital preservation in an institution, and but we are now, for instance, at the stage where the preservation system is automatically ingesting in the background everything that is published on the data repository, which closes the circle in terms of core trust seal certification. So we are actually able to apply for certification by core trust seal for a trusted digital repository status, we hope. We're in the process still. It's a long process, but it's possible because there is a preservation system that is actually behind the open access repository. Right, and then this is just a slide to show how many different roles there in fact are. And again, borrowing from Isak, they need to be described and they need to be assigned. And that's again, that is not possible without a community engagement. That community engagement we are now having through the Data Stewards, and that was very much what was missing before. The actors were too much in isolation. So in summary, yeah, yes?
You have 2 minutes left.
Oh, 2 minutes. Yes, thank you, Dale. So why we need them, I think has become quite clear. But again, just to circle back, if data are in fact the factual records used as primary sources for research, and talking about the environment of a research intensive university, then we need to do enough with those data, and that is a community effort. So, you know, where open science comes in, that's where research data management, and that's where the community comes in to ensure that at every stage in the process, from planning and designing all the way through to discovering, reusing, and citing the data, is actually taken care of. There are people working together on making sure that that these goals are reached. We have put all of our resources around our research data services openly accessible online on our Open Science Framework community. Just in case you're not familiar, UCT has got an OSF for institutions environment. And of course, you probably all know about the Open Science Framework. It's a fantastic platform for doing just that, and lots of integrations, as you can see here, and as you probably know, but I don't have time to go into at this point anymore. But thank you very much for your attention, and I'll stop sharing there.
Thank you so much, Nicholas. It was really very interesting. I'll keep an eye on the chat in case there are any questions. For me, it was really exciting to see how you've actually engaged the community using your data stewards. That key line, this is the thing that we needed most. I think most people developing data services understand this, the need to reach your community is quite difficult, and the role that data stewards play in building that relationship with the champions, and actually giving the champions the sense that they are the owners of their data. You raised a really important issue around ownership that I think you've addressed very well in this service. So thank you very much. Let's just see if there are any other questions. No, then thank you to all of our speakers in this morning's session. I think there will be more. No, sorry, there is a question come through, or maybe it's a comment from Kassim. They say you can see a face in the cloud if you persist. Towards the end, you provide a very interesting slide with points that can be converted to do anything. Okay, thank you very much. Nicholas, you can see the comment there. If you want to follow up with Kassim directly, the session, our time is up. The session has now come to an end. So thank you everybody for joining us. There'll be a break now until 2 o'clock when the next session will begin. Thank you. Bye.